Hello everybody, it's Max with Crypto Talk now. When it comes to Quant, we always mention this specifically, and that is scalability. But in order to state scalability, you must understand what it truly means and what it's all about. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's Quant coverage. As you can see right here, start off with this and full screen it. It mentions the specifics, the blockchain scalability problem, and the race to do just that, the race for a Visa-like transaction speed. Now I'm going to start off with this. There's, of course, this particular statement. Yes, blockchain has a scalability problem. Here's what it is, and here's what people are doing to solve it. Now, you can basically draw that connection to the likes of Quant. Quant is definitely solving it. For the purposes of this video, we're going to give you an outline to pound it home that much more, to have a firm understanding of what they do at scale that nobody else does, just like Gilbert Verdian has pointed out many times. So the battle for a scalable solution is just that, the blockchain's moon race, if you will. A good example, like you see right here, is that Bitcoin processes 4.6 transactions per second. Visa does around 1,700 transactions per second on average. And of course, in regards to a study that happened back in 2018 from Tata Communications, it showed that basically 44% of organizations in a survey are adopting blockchain. Basically, to put it lightly, there was severe transfer delays back in, for instance, 2017 and even 2018, if you will, that resulted in high fees on the Bitcoin network. And for instance, something that was kind of notorious, right? CryptoKitties, horrible thing, that was basically an app that congested the Ethereum blockchain network. And, you know, the bottom line is this. How bad is blockchain scalability today? Well, get into that. So check this out on top of that, right? So in regards to Visa, you know, we did a recent video on Stellar Lumen's XLM. By the way, check that out. You're definitely going to want to do that because it draws a connection to just that as well, the whole thing with Visa. Now, I'm not going to, of course, make a video just about covering, you know, this whole thing with payments, but you do have to have a firm understanding of some of these terms about scalability. Because if you solve scalability, then you achieve that much what? More utility, because you're solving real-world use case for not just, for instance, the retail sector, but big businesses, financial sectors, you name it, right? So this particular example says, for instance, Visa handles an average of 150 million transactions every day, and that basically computes about 1736 transactions per second. Not too shabby, right? We have some other examples here, of course, in regards to Bitcoin and all this technical, you know, stats that you see and so on. For instance, like transactions per block, how it's divided, the formula. You kind of get the gist, right? Interesting block size or decreasing block generation. Time won't solve the problem. They get more into it. Now, I want to jump to the next part of this because, if anything, it's not that we want to read a bunch of scenarios, but what I want to bring you guys is this right here. It says existing and future approaches to solve just that, scalability. It says when looking for the potential answer to the scalability problem, multiple other issues arise. Yeah. For example, if the answer is only applicable for one other particular blockchain, then it relies on the assumption that the particular blockchain will be the one that needs that scalability in the future. Otherwise, the effort is undue or misplaced. Another consideration is to understand what the trade-offs may very well be. Right now, all solutions available come with limitations. But here's the thing. When it comes to Quant, we already know that they are basically solving that scalability at scale that nobody else is doing. How are they able to do that? Well, for one, they're blockchain agnostic. And And number two, which technically should be the number one, is that Quant is an operating system, or I should say, Overledger is an operating system, right? Technically, QNT, you could basically say it's a token. But yes, the Overledger, the beloved operating system that's provided by Quant. Now, of course, there's more information in regards to, batch payments into one's transaction. You could take your own deep dive into some of this, right? And don't get me wrong, it's very worth pointing out, right? Like they give you examples about Bitcoin Cash, the Lightning Network, and, there's pros and cons even with that, right? And of course, I don't want to take a deep dive into that, maybe some other time, right? But, there's other, for instance, high-performance blockchains. But if anything, what I want to point out is that, when it comes to all this other concepts of various different blockchains and how they're interoperable, they only become interoperable when they have, for instance, they have another blockchain attached to it. Again, that Quant connection. How are they able to solve scalability when, in fact, nobody else is doing it compared to the way that they're doing it? Well, we'll get, again, more into that. So it says, existing and future approaches to solve scalability. How does that happen? Well, basically, like it shows right here, when looking for the potential answer to the scalability problem, multiple other issues arise. A good example, basically, is, in this case, it says if the answer is only applicable for one particular blockchain, then it relies on the assumption that the particular blockchain will be the one that needs that scalability in the future. Otherwise, the effort is undue or misplaced. Another consideration is to understand what the trade-offs may very well be. Right now, all solutions available come, like it mentions, with limitations. And of course, we mentioned the whole thing about, batch payments to one of his transactions. It kind of gives you the same representation on the previous one. Now, when I did a deep dive into this, I said to myself, the white paper, yeah, that crazy thing that, sometimes people just don't want to read all of it because, they're like, it's just too technical. Well, I have taken the liberty to narrow it down. So this comes straight from the Quant Overledger white paper, and it mentions some of these specifics. From a technology perspective, the fact that distributed or decentralized applications are single ledger dependent makes it difficult to choose the appropriate DLT fit for a purpose, meeting technical and even business requirements when considering DLTs for decentralized applications. This technical dependency slows down just that mass adoption, limits scope, impedes scalability of new features, and reduces necessary controls required for data security and privacy. I'm going to scroll a few parts down just a moment. And of course, that talks about a lot of these other ones like, Polkadot and so on. I want to get to this particular part I have for you. And that is this right here. And basically, that is speed and throughput of messages. So, for instance, it states building new decentralized applications on the blockchain layer are affected by the parameters concerning the underlying layers, for example, via transactions, energy efficiency, scalability, and so on. Now, it goes on to mention, in fact, if we want to act as the quote-unquote overlayer, we must accept and respect the latency of all underlying blockchain technologies involved. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just that, kind of like what they mentioned in their discussion about speed and throughput of messages, basically relevant. How do we know that? Well, let's face it. Gilbert Verdian basically wrote the ISO standard back in, 2014, then implemented in 2015 with what? For instance, TC307, that particular ISO standard. All right, so I want to get more into this. Let me just zoom out for a brief moment. And that is, of course, this comes straight from this particular website, which is Chain Debrief. Now, this was reported not too long ago, right? Back on November 18th, 2022. It says how Quant Network is future-proofing scalability. Hence the topic of our discussion in this particular video. Now, here's some key takeaways, and then we'll get more and more into the nitty-gritty, or pounding it home, if you will. So, Quant Networks, basically uses their Overledger, right, that operating system platform for universal enterprise interoperability. They're always talking about interoperability, right? Well, in a previous video, we went into detail, brief detail, because we got right to the highlight, on the significance of what? MDApps, right? And how they're basically used for horizontal scalability, like it mentions, allowing users to make transactions across multiple ledgers simultaneously. Then it mentions to do so, the network leverages four main layers, namely transactions, messaging, hence, for instance, the ISO standard, filtering, and ordering, and the application layers. Now, of course, they give you a brief description about, how Bitcoin was invented in 2009. We get all that, right? But when you get down to some of just that, the nitty-gritty, one thing that it mentions specifically, that although many improvements have been made and each serves to achieve something different, they are still plagued by a number of issues. One that's frequently mentioned is the lack of interoperability between blockchains. What do we know about Quant? Quant allows 100 plus blockchains to be fully interoperable at what scale that nobody else is doing. This is how we achieve mass adoption. It's that utility that kicks in that makes, for instance, the want and the need for Quant compared to everything else that's out there. You want your crypto that you're invested in to have just that. You know how they're always talking about, what does your crypto project have as far as utility? Well, Quant solves it at scale. If you're solving things at scale, then you're solving things to get crypto in general to that mass adoption that we are all craving for. That's why you got into Quant. You heard that's going to become, quote unquote, like the next Bitcoin, if you will, but with what? Interoperability. All right. So it says every blockchain is built differently, which we know, which understand impedes interoperability and compatibility between different networks. These blockchains are unable to share information and data amongst themselves unless they undergo a process that is tedious, as it consumes time, energy, and other resources. Hence why we see, for instance, when it comes to a lot of these blockchain projects, they've gone basically green. Like, for instance, Algorand is a perfect example of that. By the way, look out for a deep dive in the future in regards to Algo. Now, what about the lack of interoperability? Well, it states the lack of interoperability is one of the biggest concerns to the mass adoption of crypto around the world. With sanctions and clampdowns by many nations triggering skepticism, it's only natural for investors to want an answer. Then, for instance, Quant. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. In this article, well, I'm not reading the whole thing, we do, for instance, have a look at Quant and get a bit technical to evaluate its relevance to just that, the crypto landscape. Now, they have a whole outline, and of course, I have my own. I'm just basically highlighting some key areas. So, like I mentioned before, when it comes to TC307, that particular ISO standard, look at this particular quote from who? Gilbert Verdian. So it says, from an idea in PowerPoint in 2013 to, quote, overlay different blockchains to interoperate to establishing the ISO standard, which is basically TC307, and incorporating in 2015 and to also basically do that today. Of course, he feels proud about all these achievements, celebrates the 6th birthday, or anniversary. Is it birthday? Anniversary? I don't know. But the point is, he has so much experience in all of this, right? And what he, as in Gilbert Verdian, brings to the table is it's amazing. So one thing I want to point out is this. So it says the Quant Network's Overledger platform, again, that operating system, is a form of DLT designed for universal enterprise interoperability. The enterprise blockchain platform envisions itself as a decentralized network of networks. that can infuse existing enterprise technology with decentralized elements by interconnecting private and public data while maintaining the security and speed required by global enterprise organizations. Now, in regards to Quant, they expect to contribute to the development of a fair and more transparent global financial system while providing a whole new layer of value and utility for legacy organizations. So it's not saying that, we're, replacing things. Like for instance, everybody's saying, "Oh, we're replacing Swift." We're not replacing Swift. If anything, you're providing a new layer or an upgrade, right? So we get more and more into this. It gives, for instance, how the overledger works and so on. But that's not the point. The point is to understanding what they do at scale that nobody else does. The three key takeaways here, right? You have the transaction layer, the messaging layer, like through ISO, and the filtering and ordering layer. Now, what I want to get down to, for instance, is the application layer, right? Because when it comes to the nitty-gritty of how a lot of this works, it does need to have some emphasis and focus on just that, the application layer. Now, it says messages deemed valid based on having the required format and signatures can't update the state of application relevant to them. In a nutshell, various applications can share identical messages and make references to messages related to other applications. These references use one-of-a-kind hash pointers referring to the ledger transactions with the message basically that's digested, if you will. These pointers essentially refer back to the storage location of a particular cryptographic hash. Now, I know this is technical, but listen to me for a second. They also function as identifiers which can be used to pick out transactions from a database and confirm its unchanged status. Now you see, for instance, on the application layer, you have an MAP of AB, and then you have this other one on the other side, basically these multi-chain applications. Then from there, you go to Overledger, right? The operating system of Quant. That's going to filter and basically put in these ordering layers and go from the messaging layer and so on, right? To, for instance, those particular blockchains, infrastructures, and even the network, right? And then from there, for instance, like the internet, okay? So if you're solving things at scale, you have to have an idea of how the breakdown is. This is a perfect illustration of how that works. And of course, he's going to mention some of these other things like the Overledger, DLT gateway, so on and so forth. Now, what I want to also point out, not about the tokenomics or anything, but I want to point out this right here. And that is, when you have statements of, we need to get crypto, the scalability solved. We need to get, for instance, the mass adoption to get more people into this, whether it's from the retail sector or the financial sector or institutional money, so on and so forth, right? So you see this statement right here, straight from Gilbert Verdian. It states, we are not just working on blockchain technology. Right, they're not, right? Overledger's operating system. That we are working in three governments to help shape the ecosystem, set standards, right, like ISO and so on, and policy, and drive what? Mass adoption. How do we know that? Well, we know that basically, I guess that was already zoomed in, based on his, as in Gilbert Verdian's experience with some of these ones that you see, but specifically the UK, the European Union, heck, even the United States. And of course, what he brought to ISO with TC307, Blockchain Distributed Ledger Technologies, 2017 to present. Right? When you write the standard 2014, then you got to get implemented, so on and so forth. And he still has these connections. And of course, you see, for instance, what Gilbert Verdian brings to the table to the new prime, his connections with the new prime minister of the UK. All right. Last but not least, I want to play this. So it says, one of the benefits of distributed ledger technology is speed to market. This is what makes Quant really, really stand out, because again, when we talk about utility and we talk about this particular utility run that's going to happen, you definitely have to put XRP, XLM, and Quant at the top of that list. And this is why Quant is part of that particular list, is part of that utility run, because they solve things at scale. That scalability is so crucial. So it says, for instance, in this clip, Gilbert Verdian talks about State Street, Northern Trust, Clearstream project, mentioned, of course, at Sibos. We cover Sibos quite a bit here at CTN. Of course, this, the key thing is he mentions it was delivered in months, not years, thanks to what? DLT. And when we talk about that mass adoption, and you have specific utility-driven coins and tokens that solve, for instance, in the case of Quant, scalability, and solve, for instance, some of the problems to get over the hump of mass adoption, it makes you think, wow, that is how a utility run gets kicked in. All right, we're going to go ahead and watch this. This is 2 minutes, and then we'll come right back.
I think the business case adds up, where one of the talks which had State Street, it had Northern Trust and others, Clearstream, talking about what they've done. And what they demonstrated was if they were to build a new platform using non-DLT, let's just pretend it doesn't exist, it would have taken them 3 to 5 years just to get the thing up and running. They've taken that same concept and used DLT technology, and they have completed everything end-to-end in less than a year, so about 8 months. So speed to market is a huge competitive advantage for them. And using DLT, it's the accelerator, because what they can do is automate a whole bunch of complex back-end processes. They can issue digital assets in a new way, which are all immutable, or they're all accessible to different members and different stakeholders. Whereas if they didn't have that, they would have to create huge amounts of networks, infrastructure, applications would have to be protected, databases would have to be isolated and then synced and reconciled. So all these manual processes just to make it work. That all goes away with DLT. It's a real transformative technology, but more importantly, it's a business accelerator now. And so they've actually had customers come to them saying, I would like to issue a new security, whatever it may be, and they're able to serve the market in a very rapid way, which they could never do before. So their customers are happy because they can become public or issue securities as quickly as they need.
All right. In closing, I'm going to come back into the frame just for a brief moment. And that is this. You heard him basically mention that Quant, basically with the overledger, right, is the accelerator, if you will. So if anything, he uses that particular example that with overledger, they were able to have speed to market within 8 months compared to something that would took normally about 3 to 4 years without DLT. So my thing is this. We understand what Quant solves at scale that nobody else is really doing. With that said, if they're solving things at scalability that nobody else is doing, what is the real value in that? And if anything, if they have a mechanism or utility that solves a big problem of getting over, like I mentioned earlier, that hump of mass adoption, you could draw your own conclusion on how we solve just that, mass adoption, by solving scalability. Again, that Quant connection. So that is it for today's video in regards to Quant and this particular news update, or deep dive, if you will. If you enjoy the content that we provide here at Crypto Talk Now, like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And by all means, press that bell notification. If you want more Quant coverage or some of these other ISO tokens and coins on a live show in that type of format, you can join us every single day at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific for Crypto Talk Now. Thanks again for watching, everyone. May you all have a blessed day. We will see you on the next one.